Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 117 of Waking Up to Narcissism. I am your host, Tony Overbay. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a certified mindful habit coach, a writer, speaker. I used to have a whole line that I would do here: husband, father of four, ultra marathon runner. It's been a little while since one of those ultra marathons has happened in my life. But I am excited to be here today for what I'm imagining is going to be part one of two, because this is one of those topics that the more I just started jotting down notes and putting down an outline, I couldn't stop. So we'll probably break this into two episodes, but I think it's an important concept. We're going to talk about gaslighting, but we're going to go even deeper into that today. And I also have a client in less than an hour. So real therapist life. I guess I should have said hashtag, but it's not really the early 2000s anymore. So if you are interested in joining my private women's Facebook group, please reach out. If you're a guy who wants to learn about your own emotional immaturity or waking up to your narcissistic traits or tendencies, or even those in your partner, then reach out to me and we'll talk about my emotional architects group. And then one last thing, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I get a lot of emails and I want to do them justice. And a lot of people are asking for advice. Continue to send those. I want all of your examples. I want you to be able to feel heard and understood. But if you're also interested in getting my take on some of the issues that you might be dealing with in your own relationship, then let me know that. And I'm trying to find a way that I might be able to provide some of those tools as well. Let's get to the topic today. I want to start with a letter that I got and a poem. It's a very short poem, but we're going to go deep into this poem. The person says, "Hi, Tony. I was introduced to your work by the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. So shout out to my good friend, Kate Anthony, and her amazing book, The D Word." She said, which says something about the context in which I wrote this. She said, "Thanks for what you do. Man, you're really out there making a difference." Okay, now for the poem. "I was made to feel like a fool, falling for my own reflection, by a mimic with an addiction to repeating my words back to me unflatteringly. Short, but sweet, and a little bit of rhyming, which always calms my own central nervous system. I guess that's just a way that it just feels right. But I know that that might be a little bit of my own immaturity, that I really like a good old roses are red, violets are blue kind of poem." But I want to break this poem down. Here's the context. One of the reasons this episode took a little while in the making was because of this influx of emails. And so I took a lot of different emails and then I made some grandiose assumptions of what this writer has gone through in their life. And I am owning the fact that what you just heard is all the information that I have. But I think so often when I get the emails that say, "It sounds like you've been in my house," or "You were in the car listening to the argument," or "You must be right there beside me as I'm going throughout my day," it's because the consistency of the emotionally immature, or the person with extreme narcissistic traits, tendencies, all the way up to the person who has narcissistic personality disorder. So I think that this poem, if we break it down, and we'll do this line by line, there's a lot of gold to be mined. And the examples that I'll use as we break this poem down are all, we'll say, based on true stories, but the names and some of the details have been changed for the sake of confidentiality. The analysis of this poem, let me read that again. She said, "I was made to feel like a fool, falling for my own reflection, by a mimic with an addiction to repeating my words back to me unflatteringly." Let's just paint a hypothetical backstory. Let's imagine a woman named Sarah. We'll say that she's 45. She's been married to, we'll call him John, for 20 years. And throughout their marriage, Sarah's often felt confused and anxious and unsure of herself. She has doubted her memory. She feels very anxious, and she just becomes so unsure of herself that she starts thinking, "I really don't even know who I am." And she finds herself doubting her perception of events. Did they even happen the way that I think they did? And then she starts to really think over time, and from early on, she must be the problem in the relationship because John is consistently criticizing her. There is frequent manipulation that she's aware of, but then she still thinks, "Must be me." So recently, Sarah started to recognize the signs of gaslighting and narcissistic behavior. And at this point, we'll say that she wasn't even quite sure about the concept of emotional immaturity, because I think that so many people stumble upon traits, these tendencies, these patterns of behavior, and see that word narcissist, and it says, go, run. This is uncurable, unfixable, and you're going to drive yourself crazy. Now, I'm not even making an argument if that is true or false right now. We're going to put that over on the side. But the person that's coming to this realization is somebody that's probably been working on the relationship or working on trying to make sense of the relationship and continually trying to bring things to their partner's awareness in hopes that they will be able to give them that aha moment. And that then all of a sudden, everything will change, complete with the unicorn and the pot of gold and the leprechaun. Her realization of starting to recognize and understand the concept of gaslighting, or even what narcissistic traits or tendencies appear to be, is pretty unsettling. And that's where we start to feel uncomfortable, and we are wired to alleviate that discomfort. So one of the easiest things that we can do is to say, it's got to be me. Why? Because if I can make sure that it's me, I can fix it. But if it's not me, then that may mean that I might have to deal with some really uncomfortable conversations, decisions, and just life choices down the road. So we're going to do everything we can to see that it's me, that I can either convince my partner, don't you understand and see what's happening here? And if not, got to be me, because I can work on me. But then that realization has led her to go back and review the entire relationship. And she starts seeing everything in a new light. And it's too easy to go to this, but it's the movie The Sixth Sense, when at the end, spoiler alert, 20-something-year-old movie, but you find out that Bruce Willis was dead the entire time. And then if you watch it a second time, it's mind-blowing, but mind-blowing in a way of, whoa, now I see, now I get it. If that's your own life, then it's, I don't want to see this. I don't want to get it. He was alive when I saw him. We don't want to admit that. So this poem that she's written, I think just really captures her emotional journey along with this newfound understanding. And it was very concise. So line by line, she said the first line, I was made to feel like a fool. So I really think that we could go on a little journey here and say that that reflects Sarah's realization that her own feelings of inadequacy were cultivated by John. Now we can say that, is it conscious? Is it subconscious? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But for so many years, she's believed that she was foolish. She was forgetful, that she must not be understanding. But the more that she's starting to become aware of what emotional immaturity looks like, or narcissistic traits or tendencies, she starts to see that, okay, this is more a him thing. I'm feeling the way I'm feeling because of his manipulative behavior. And I think if you're new to the podcast, one of the things that I want to make sure and be clear about is one of the reasons why I want to go with a mouthful of words every time I talk about emotionally immature or someone who has narcissistic traits or tendencies, nay, even narcissistic personality disorder, is because only a small percentage of the population would be diagnosed as a narcissist. But I think we are all emotionally immature. It only makes sense because we're only now starting to talk about mental health in a broader light. We're starting to talk about what attachment looks like, secure attachment to a parent. So I would imagine that if you're listening to this podcast, most likely you can even say, bless their heart, and your parents tried their best because they did with what they knew, because they didn't know what they didn't know. But that doesn't mean that we weren't modeled emotionally immature behaviors, maybe not taking ownership of things, or we watched our parents get out of things, say, son, never lie. But then the doorbell rings. They're like, tell them I'm not home. And then we're thinking, I don't really know how to make sense of that. But I also know that if I ask, I'm probably going to get in trouble. So I guess that's what we do. So we may say that we don't lie, but we can lie because there's a reason why we did, but we'll still say that we don't. And I hope you can start to see that emotional inconsistency, we have to start to make sense of, because again, if I can make sense of it, if I can own it and say, okay, I can understand how that works now, then I don't have to actually confront or talk to the person who is doing the behavior, because I'm probably aware that that's not going to go well. And the last thing I want to do is feel like I'm in trouble. So we go back to now she's starting to understand that this is a result of John's manipulative behavior. Bless his heart, he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And so she's starting to become more aware. So that second line, here's where we're going to start to really dig in. So she said, falling for my own reflection. Sarah starts to recognize that John would often reflect her own words and behaviors back to her, but he would change them. They would be in more of a distorted way. And so that started to make her doubt her own actions, her own motivations. And it was almost like she's falling for a trick mirror version of herself. One of those that you see at the Santa Cruz boardwalk that has the waves in it and it makes you look really heavier than you might have been at that time, hypothetically. And people are all crowded around the one that makes you look skinny. So you can't get there, again, all hypothetical. But that line, I think, represents how the gaslighter distorts the victim's words, and they distort their actions, their intentions, and they make that person doubt themselves. And let me give a couple more examples. So here's where we start bringing in the other emails that have come in recently. I call this one the misinterpreted concern. So let's say that Sarah says, hey, I noticed you've been working late a lot, actually, and it worries me. I'm worried about your stress level. Sounds like she's being pretty cool, right? But in one of these examples, John says, oh, so do you think this is unusual? Do you think that normally I'm pretty lazy, that I don't work hard enough during the day? So now all of a sudden, John's working a lot. He's finally earning his keep. And then he says, man, you always criticize my work ethic. In that scenario, Sarah was legitimately expressing concern for John's well-being. But then John takes it, twists her words, and he reflects back a distorted version of her intention. So then she starts to doubt herself, thinking, wait, I really thought I thought I was being nice, but did I really imply that he was lazy? I mean, that must be a me thing. Am I too critical? So she starts to fall for this whole warped reflection of her own words. and our own intentions. You can see that it starts to just be this pattern where somebody is going in saying, I really think that I meant well, but am I not coming across that way? I'm looking in this mirror and it's reflecting back to me that I must be kind of a jerk. I didn't think I am. So now all of a sudden you're walking on eggshells around everywhere thinking, am I doing this to everybody? Example 2, the remembered promise. This is one that I got a few different examples of recently. Sarah said, I thought we agreed to save money this month for our vacation as she watched John spend on various things that they had this agreement that they were going to talk about the things that they spend money on together. John, the old classic, I didn't agree to that. That's something that must be something you thought of. And you kind of always make things up and then you blame me when they don't happen. So I appreciate that you want to go on a vacation, but we never had that conversation. So now if you want to make me feel bad about things that we need, where it might have been something like a new set of golf clubs, I mean, that seems pretty stereotypical. But then he gets to now question her intentions because here he's denying, first of all, that the conversation even happened. And then he's creating this distorted reflection of Sarah's memory. So then she starts to question her own memory, how the events played out. She starts thinking, okay, I am so sure that we talked about going on a vacation, that we were going to save money because we're not good about saving money. But then she's like, did I really imagine that whole conversation? Do I make things up? I don't think I do. In both of those examples, we go back to the line in the poem, falling for her own reflection, in the sense that she is being tricked into doubting her own perceptions, her own words, her own memories. So the gaslighter, John, in this scenario, is acting like a distorting mirror. He's reflecting back that twisted version of reality that makes her question herself. And this technique it's really bad because it uses the victim's own words and their own actions against them. So then it makes them harder to trust themselves and it makes them easier prey for the gaslighter to keep control in the relationship. And this is why when I say that these 5 rules of interacting with an emotionally immature or narcissistic person, you got to raise that emotional baseline, which is self-care. It's not selfish. And it can be little things. Start to dream, read, believe. You don't have to go run the marathon. Second one is get that PhD in gaslighting. We're going to talk more about what it is today. The third thing is once you're aware of that, get out of those unproductive conversations because they're going to be crazy making. And the fourth one is learn how to set healthy boundaries. And a boundary is if you are going to do this, then I'm going to leave or I'm going to stop interacting or whatever that looks like. It's not you need to stop. That's an ultimatum. And that's a challenge to a narcissist. But then that fifth one is that I will never give them the aha moment or the epiphany. And one of the unfortunate things is the more that you try to give them the aha moment or the epiphany, you're actually handing them more buttons to push, things that are important to you that then can be turned around against you. That happens in that fourth step and the fifth step. If you're saying, hey, you need to not talk about me negatively in front of the kids, then if he is really feeling insecure or immature, and it could be he or she, whoever the more emotionally immature person is, then when the kid is around, then they can say, man, I can't believe you just said that to me. So they're going to use that thing that they now know is important to you against you when they are feeling like they don't know what to do with their own emotions, that they need to externalize them and project them on to somebody else. So her next line was by a mimic with an addiction. She now sees John as somebody who mimics or mirrors others. And that is such a common trait in somebody with extreme emotional immaturity, narcissistic personality. And then I really appreciate where she goes with the word addiction. And again, I don't know the backstory here, but I often have people that look at this behavior as compulsive and it is just reflexive. It's habitual. If that's the case for John, this isn't just from time to time, there's an occasional bout of manipulation. And this is where it starts to feel like the person is going crazy because they can't wrap their head around the fact that this is the air that this emotionally immature person breathes. But then as you interact with them, they see that as now an opportunity to then take your words and then either put themselves in the one-up position and say that, well, that's actually wrong, or they can go extreme victim and have you come back and rescue them. That leads to this concept of the reflected sense of self. I did an episode on this a few weeks ago, but this line by a mimic with an addiction in the poem, it really speaks to this fundamental aspect of narcissistic personality disorder or extreme emotional immaturity, which is that lack of a stable internal sense of self. So instead, the narcissist, the emotionally immature person, they construct this identity through the reflection and interaction with others. That's why I often feel like they need another human to interact with to know that they exist. It's almost the opposite of that. You walk into a room and everybody drops down like a toy. It's called the Andy challenge, I think, from Toy Story. It's more like they're just hanging out there and maybe admiring themselves in a reflected phone screen. I don't know. And then you walk in and like, hey, what are you thinking? And you say something like, okay, that's wrong, or I've done that better than you. And there, I feel better. Thank you. So this is this construct or the identity that psychologists call this reflected sense of self. And what it's all about is there's at their core, it's empty. So many emotionally immature narcissistic people feel empty or incomplete. Now, that isn't something they are self-confronting or reflecting on. It is just how they feel. So how do they get rid of that feeling? Because it comes from this lack of a strong, coherent sense of who they are, a strong sense of self or sense of purpose. Because then that requires external validation. That's where you start dipping into the emotional immaturity. Because when we are kids, we get our entire sense of self from external validation. We need interaction with others. Hopefully, parents who are good, who are trying to help us have a secure attachment so that once we know we're okay, we can go explore the world and come back to this home base. And we know that it is a safe place to come. But for most of us growing up, sometimes it feels safe, sometimes it doesn't. And so it's this intermittent reinforcement. The same person that can provide me with this beautiful reward of validation also provides me with the punishment. And as a kid, we're just being kids, so we don't even know what just happened. It sets us up to then feel this need to know that somebody else can tell me I'm okay, or I'm not sure if I'm okay. So to fill that emptiness for the emotionally immature or narcissist, they are constantly seeking validation and then admiration and praise from other people. So then they're using people as mirrors to reflect back this image, typically a grandiose image of themselves. So they need to interact with you. And if you have a different opinion than them, then that means that you must think they're wrong. And so now they need to let you know that they are right and you are wrong. If you express that you have done something, then they assume that you must think that they don't know how to do that thing. So then they will go bigger and try to take that one-up position. And it can just be the air that this person breathes. And that false sense of self or reflected sense of self, in essence, looks like this chameleon-like behavior. And what's so fascinating is when you start talking about things that people don't know that they don't know, or don't know that this is maybe not the greatest way to show up. I don't want to throw it into it's wrong, because it's just the way that they're showing up. Is you often find people that they feel like that is their sense of purpose, that they can be whoever they need to be in any given situation. Because that is this need for external validation. And then that leads to this concept of basically people becoming social chameleons, because they can change their personality, they change their opinions, their behavior to fit whatever they think will gain them approval or acceptance within the group, or a control in the situation. Here's the challenge I'm giving the people that I work with, and it's a simple one. If you go to somewhere like a movie or a restaurant, usually we'll say, well, what'd you think about the movie? And everybody feels the room. I don't know, what'd you think? I liked it. And they're like, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. If inside you're thinking, that was horrible. Or if you really liked it, and then you're worried that if I say I really like that, somebody's going to say, wow, you liked that one? So I have this homework assignment where people are going to watch a show, they're going to eat a meal at a restaurant, they're going to go out somewhere, and they really have to type out here's how I feel about this place. And then it's almost as if at 1, 2, 3, show it, so that this is my true opinion. This is how I feel about something, because we are not even often aware that we're gauging what we really think about something based off of what we think that the other person will think or how they'll react. And then how that looks in relationships in this context of our hypothetical couple, Sarah and John, and we talk about this concept of addiction to mimicry, then I think that it's going to look like a lot of things mirroring in early relationships. So often you see that in the early stages of a relationship, John might have seemed like perfectly matched to Sarah. Here's where that idea of codependency and enmeshment, where we're coming from a pretty good place. Most likely we're both doing this early in a relationship, where if somebody says, do you like movies? And if the other person really feels like they're a waste of time, but they like this person, then they're thinking of a movie or two that they've enjoyed. So like, yeah, no, I do like movies. But then if that other person that loves movies is saying, tell me your top 5. And this person's thinking, I don't even know if I can name 5 that I've seen. Then they're going to say, well, I don't know, you tell me your 5. I want to hear what you have to say. So in that scenario, the person might reel off 5 or 10. And they're like, oh my gosh, I like those as well. And then it feels like we've just got this immediate connection. And so that will feel like we just are on the same page. Everything's so easy. And that's part of the love bombing phase, but it can also just be part of we're both emotionally immature and we're enmeshed and codependent. And we think that's the person I need to marry, the person that just everything just seems so easy. So he likely mirrored her interests, her values, her desires, and it makes her feel deeply understood. It made her feel connected. And she could be doing the same thing. That's where I feel like we all go into these relationships. We're codependent, we're enmeshed. But then as we go through life and we start to go through experiences and we start to have different opinions and thoughts and feelings as we start having kids or jobs, or we have financial issues, and then we start to realize, oh, we have 2 different ideas of what savings means or budgeting means, or we might not even know what those things mean. And so if we try to have those conversations, it's uncomfortable. So let's go back to the thing about how we both like the same movies or the same sports, because that one feels better and we'll just kick the other one down the road. And I was thinking about this as we'll call it, I know there's a lot of talk about identity theft when it comes to credit cards and your identity that you're entering in websites. And I feel like lately there are more and more people that, let's say they have their credit card on file and they're seeing me as I'm their therapist, and I go to charge it and it just declines. And then you reach out to the person and they're saying, oh, I had my identity stolen again. So this concept of identity theft, though, as a relationship progresses, then Sarah might have noticed John adopting her mannerisms, her own phrases, or even her life stories, and those start to become her own. This is one of those that I think if you haven't experienced, it is mind-blowing, but I have had numerous examples, not using narcissistic math. I won't say it's hundreds or thousands, but a lot of examples of where a couple has been together for such a long time. And the husband, if it's the more emotionally immature wife, will then pull me aside and say, actually happened to me, but she now tells that story as if it was her or vice versa. I remember one a long time ago where the woman had quite a rodeo career early in her life. And by the time that I was seeing them in couples therapy, the guy was telling me about his amazing rodeo career. And I was buying it. I was, yeehaw, you must still be able to, rope a calf. I think that's a rodeo thing. Not like the calf in your leg, I don't think. And then he was just eating it up. And then when I had a one-on-one session with her later, she said, that was actually me. I literally have the newspaper clippings to prove it. But 5-10 years ago, he took over the story. And that's where we look at confabulation, that he's built it up. And people love that story. So he's getting that praise. He's getting that validation. And now she would bring it up. He would say, wow, taking credit for that, huh? I've never seen you ride a horse. So that identity theft, it can make you feel unsettled because it starts to make you feel like your personal boundaries are not just being run through, but they're kind of being erased. It's some time travel movie where you're watching your hand disappear all of a sudden and you don't know what to do. And then this reflected sense of self also reflects insecurity. So mirroring, it can start to take a little bit of a darker turn, starts to reflect Sarah's insecurities, her fears in her exaggerated form. So an example of this is if Sarah expressed a little bit of concern, if she brought gentle awareness that she doesn't really feel good about her appearance, then later John might accuse her of being vain or overly focused on her looks. Or, man, if he's really having an off day, he might see her and she might be feeling pretty good about herself. And he says, oh, are you wearing that? Is that, I didn't know is that the dress code? Or, are you sure you want to wear that? And because he knows that is important to her. And so that can really feel devastating, which leads to emotional instability because his sense of self is reflected. It's reflected rather than it's internal. And his moods, his behaviors, they start to change rapidly. It's like weather in my new state of Arizona. 1 minute it's 110, the next minute still 110. But now all of a sudden there's a storm that blows in, apparently monsoon season. There was a time recently where I'm in my office now and my wife says, I'll come get you because I'm driving this 3-wheel tricycle thing that I really enjoy. And I look outside and it looks pretty good to me, but 4 miles over, it's a torrential downpour and 110 degrees. But that instability, it can leave Sarah feeling constantly off balance. She's not sure, and you hear this so often, which version of John that she's going to encounter. And that reflected sense of self also leads to projection. Unable to acknowledge their own flaws or their own negative traits, a narcissist or an emotionally immature person projects those onto their partner. So John might accuse Sarah of being selfish or manipulative or untrustworthy. You even hear the more extreme versions of this where I worry that you are cheating, and where she'll feel like, where did that come from? And it's difficult sometimes in the therapy setting to then point out, well, if that's what he is worried that someone might catch him, then he may be projecting, or her, if she's doing the same thing, might be projecting that onto their partner. That can really feel the partner feeling like, whoa, I can't believe they think that of me. Where in reality, it might be more that they're thinking about that of themselves. And then let's talk about the addiction aspect, because the behavior can appear compulsive for the narcissist. There's this constant need, and it's like an addict always seeking the next hit. We call this the narcissistic supply. So the narcissist continually needs external sources of validation to maintain their sense of self. So if they start to feel this withdrawal, it's almost like when they're deprived of this narcissistic supply, which could be admiration or more likely control, then they start to become desperate. They might get angry. They might feel depressed. And that's where they don't like how they feel about themselves. So come here, let me manipulate you, and you need to tell me I'm awesome, or I need to make sure and you know that you are not as good as I am. I think that one breaks my heart, because if you look at the world of differentiation, I know I've done a lot of episodes on that lately. And when adults are still craving or desperate for this need for external validation, it's not crazy to think of because we're all growing to become more emotionally mature. But one of the best things you can do is to really discover who you are and what it feels like to be you, calm, grounded, able to self-soothe, because then you're showing up in the relationship and you're okay. So that leads to a lot more stability. And you can be curious about, well, tell me why you think that I'm doing something wrong, because I'm just doing it. I'm just doing and being. But in that scenario, though, that is where the person, if they have their whole sense of self from external validation, then they're saying, I don't feel good about myself. So I need you to tell me that I'm good. Tell me I'm okay. And when in those moments, they're not appearing to be very good or okay. So then you may feel like you're betraying your own sense of self, saying, no, you're awesome. And this is where if you go with the emotionally immature person and you throw a nice combo pack in there of if they, the love languages, bless their heart, not evidence-based model. People, I think, often weaponize them more than anything. They're a muse to take a look at. But I work with so many people, yours truly included, that would always feel like, okay, I like words of affirmation and physical touch. When you start to really dig deep on the concept of needing external validation to feel better about ourselves, then we're saying that, okay, when I don't feel good about myself, I need you to tell me I'm awesome. Now, note, I'm not being very awesome, and I need you to desire me. Point B here, not being very desirable. So then if I'm demanding that of my partner, then I'm demanding that of my partner to tell me I'm awesome and desire me. And at that point, if my partner is finally feeling like this is the only way to get out of this, or else he's going to be a total jerk. Okay, you're awesome. And here, I am desiring you now, which then leaves that person feeling, him now feeling better. Okay, good. Now that I feel awesome, now you can continue because I do feel pretty good. And why don't you desire me even more? And so that is this concept of withdrawal. It also leads to this escalation because over time, there's these more intense forms of manipulation and they might be needed to achieve the same effect. It's as if the narcissist is feeling worse about themselves and they aren't feeling good about how you are showing up, trying to make them feel better. So they need you to do a little better. Can you step this up a little bit more? I need you to tell me I'm even more awesome. I need you to really desire me. Reach out to me throughout the day. Tell me how awesome I am and that you can't wait to desire me. And then if they're still not feeling good, it's like, no, that's not it. I still don't feel good about myself. So make me do it. Make me feel better. And there's consequences to that because that can cause damage in the relationship because that narcissist then will start to feel unable to stop because if they still don't feel good about themselves and now they don't feel like the person that they are trying to get to make them feel better is buying it, then they're thinking, okay, why don't you think I'm awesome? So for Sarah, in this hypothetical, recognizing this pattern, it becomes this really crucial step in understanding that his behavior isn't about her inadequacies. I hope that that's where you can see the path going here, but it's more about this fundamental lack of a stable sense of self. And when you start to realize that, it can be liberating, but back to the beginning of the episode today, it can be pretty sad that you're realizing, oh, wow, this relationship hasn't been exactly what I thought the entire time. I think one of the things that I first hear when people have this realization is they think everything, they go right to this all or nothing, black or white thinking and think, wait, the whole thing was a sham? No, you were experiencing life as you. So when you had good moments, you had good moments. When you felt the lack of connection, it wasn't always your fault. So I really like to help people hang on to those moments where because everything eventually ends up being a me thing in a good way, where they were finding a connection, where they were finding fun in a place, in a vacation or whatever that looked like, where they were having these experiences with their kids and they thought that their partner was along with them on the same page. And that's okay, because if that was how they felt in that moment, then they can stay present with that moment, but they can also start to put the other pieces together. It's that concept again of whole object relations. Now I can have some good memories, but I can also let in the frustration, the anger, the fear, the invalidation, because part of that becoming more emotionally mature is recognizing we can have a lot of different complex emotions all at one time. Think about them, again, something like nostalgia. I can be sad and I can also have memories of being happy. And those are both happening at the same time. But in our emotionally immature state, we don't want to feel those complex emotions. So it's either I don't want to think about it because it makes me sad, or all I want to do is think about it because that makes me happy. So it's more of a taking in all the different feelings, all the different emotions. And when you can come to the terms with that fact that the person that you thought you knew so well was in a lot of ways more of a reflection of her own personality rather than it was the genuine person, then it can start to be a little bit empowering. And I think that's one of those, here, cliche warning, trust the process, because as I start to recognize I was trying to show up as my best self and I didn't know what I didn't know. So here comes that acceptance of, so that happened. And I need to just now accept that here's where we are. What do I do moving forward? And then her other line, back to the poem, to repeating my words back to me. This line directly speaks to a gaslighting technique where the abuser twists the victim's words, uses them out of context or with an altered meaning. So Sarah probably experienced a lot of situations, instances where John would use her own words against her, making her doubt her own intentions or her own perceptions or her own memory. And then the last line she said, unflatteringly. And I think that unflattering comment points to how John would take Sarah's words or actions and then just reflect them back in a negative light, making her feel ashamed or guilty for things that she had maybe said or done. Let's say that she said, I really like the way I look in this outfit, where then later he might say, yeah, remember how egotistical you are and how you said, oh, I look so good in this outfit. All of a sudden she feels bad. And she goes to that place of shame about what's wrong with me. Nothing. You were feeling good in that moment. And that's okay to feel that way. And it's a bit of a how dare he then take that and turn it around on you at a time when he's not feeling good about himself. She'll start to feel guilty about things that she's said, done, even when they were innocent or they were well-intentioned. So I think that poem, it so well encapsulates this hypothetical Sarah's awakening to the gaslighting that she's experienced. And we can switch the genders. There are same gender couples. It can be the wife is the more emotionally immature, narcissistic, and the husband is the more pathologically kind. I want to acknowledge that over and over again. But most of the examples that I get in are typically that gender stereotype of the male as the more emotionally mature, narcissistic person. But here's where I do want to say this, is that when people will say, well, can the narcissist change? Well, if there is true narcissistic personality disorder, that's a whole different ballgame. But if it's your own emotional immaturity, it is a you thing. And if you are listening to this and at first you hated my voice and then you start to realize, okay, there's some truth in what this guy's saying, then I would say that there's going to be some hope. But you're going to have to do some serious introspection and recognize that you don't know what you don't know. It's one of the most liberating concepts ever, because then it starts to leave you more open and curious about, well, what else don't I know? But then what we still do is we go back to this all or nothing, black or white thinking, where as somebody starts to reflect back to you that they think that this is how you're showing up or what you're doing, if you can sit with that discomfort, and then you can really have this check-in, because I really want to have a solid but flexible sense of self, meaning knowing who I am without needing others to tell me, but I'm open to criticism because I want to be the best me. But that doesn't mean that I have to give in or acquiesce to everything that somebody else is saying about me, because technically that is what they are experiencing. Now, there might be some truth in it. And if so, then I do want to take a look at that. But sometimes the answer can be, hey, I appreciate that feedback and I'll take a look at that. And I genuinely will. It's taking ownership of my part. But sometimes taking ownership means, oh, that is what I meant, or that is my intentions, or this is how I wanted to show up. Because if I'm confident in that, then I can be curious back. Well, tell me what you're experiencing, or tell me what that's like for you. Because now we're having a moment. We're having a nice shared experience. I really think that what we're going to talk about a little bit more today, and yes, probably going to be in a part 2, is when she believes that she's the source of the problem in her marriage, then she's going to do everything she can to try to fix that. And she's handing him more fuel to use against her, twisting her words, making her doubt her memory, perceptions. And that will leave somebody feeling constantly off balance and unsure of themselves. So this whole imagery of reflection and mimicry, I think, is so powerful. And it suggests that this hypothetical Sarah now starts to recognize how John would use her own personality, her words or actions as weapons against her when he is feeling insecure or can't really tap into who he truly is. You know, he wasn't really engaging with her as a partner. It takes so much courage to know someone else, but really to be known, especially if you don't know who you are. And that can be one of the places that we find ourselves coming out of an emotionally immature relationship. But it's so much more powerful and good. It's a long-term goal, but it's better than creating this distorted mirror that then has always showed Sarah at her worst and her believing that. So back to that, I don't think I finished that term addiction. I think it implies that Sarah now sees the behavior as a fundamental part of his personality. It's not just these occasional misunderstandings or missteps. And that realization is probably going to bring a whole lot of emotions. There's probably going to be some relief, understanding that she hasn't been crazy or too sensitive, but also sadness and anger at the years where she's going to start to feel that we're lost to the manipulation. Succinct, the brevity, the directness of that poem, I feel like this speaks to a bigger thing of it's her newfound clarity. Because after years of confusion and self-doubt, she can articulate her experience succinctly and powerfully. And I think that is a bigger picture. And again, I'm using this as a muse to then say that often when people get through a little bit more of the healing process, they realize that they don't have to continually ruminate or beat themselves up or worry about why it happened, more of an acceptance of it happened. Here is what it is. Now, what am I going to do? Let's do this. I've got a whole life ahead of me. So I think that poem really represents not just an understanding of what happened to her, but it's reclaiming her own voice and her own perspective. And now let's do this. Here we go. So for her, I would imagine writing that poem was probably a pretty big part of her own healing process. And I encourage you all to write those poems, send those poems in, express your experiences. It doesn't have to be a poem, but it can start to be a way to affirm, in this scenario, her own experiences and feelings after years of having denied them or not even being aware or having her experiences twisted. So it becomes this whole statement of self-recognition, and it becomes this beginning of this journey toward reclaiming herself, healing herself from the effects of this long-term gaslighting. And we haven't even started to talk about CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, where that gaslighting over time, your brain starts to send more blood flow to the amygdala, the fight or flight response, I don't feel safe. And unfortunately, that's at the cost of your adorable little hippocampus, these little seahorse parts of the brain that are where your short-term memory is hidden. And if things don't go into short-term memory, they're not going to make it into long-term memory. So these neurons that fire together, wire together. And over time, then what it feels like to be you is somebody that's constantly in the state of alert and that criticism. When's the next thing happen? I'm walking on eggshells. And so your brain, you start to feel like your memory is non-existent. But one of the best things of understanding about complex post-traumatic stress disorder or understanding these concepts like gaslighting is that when you recognize them, then you can start to recover from them. And there's some pretty cool data coming out more and more where getting out of an unhealthy relationship or starting to be able to know who you are and staying grounded in your own sense of self can start to heal the trauma or the damage that has happened when your poor little amygdala has been working overtime to try to protect you. Let's do a little bit more. So we'll get to the real nuts and bolts of gaslighting in part 2, but there's a couple things I really want to get to. One of those is this simple explanation, which I think is a narrative form of gaslighting. So imagine you're watching a play, and on stage there's an actor and they are wearing a mask, and that mask is what they want to show the world. But behind that, there's a different face. It's one that is really, it's hurting, it's scared. That's one of the things that the narcissist is never going to acknowledge or admit to. That's kind of what happens when people who have these narcissistic traits or tendencies or what someone would just diagnose as narcissistic personality disorder. Because that mask is what we were referring to earlier as the false self. And it's the face that always needs to be right, to be the best, to win at everything. But behind that mask is the person who deep down feels very unsure of themselves, but they might not even know what they don't know. They might think that this is what everybody's going through. Because that mask didn't just pop up overnight. It was created when the person was really young. And it's usually because of the difficult things that happen in their family dynamic. Maybe they felt like they had to be perfect, which is so much of the case. Or they felt like, if I'm not perfect, if somebody's mad at me, they don't love me. Or maybe they were afraid of getting in trouble, because this is coming from a child's perspective. It's about a little kid who believes that if they make a mistake, something bad's going to happen. They might think that their family won't love them anymore. And that is scary for a kid and might feel kind of silly to hear that now. But when you are coming from a child's perspective and you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad because my feelings haven't been acknowledged. They haven't been welcomed. I've heard more of did you do that? Or don't think that, or don't do that, or we don't do that, or well, what did you do? So apparently my feelings are bad. So if I start to feel them, oh, I did something wrong. The kid comes up with a plan. I'll never be wrong. I'll always find a way to be right. That gaslighting becomes a childhood defense mechanism. So as the kid grows up, the plan becomes a habit. And over time, it becomes part of their implicit memory or what it feels like to be them. Because remember, that's based off of the slow residue of their lived experience. And before long, that is the air that they breathe. It's like they're always wearing that mask. That thing is plastered onto them. So they need to be perfect, always needing to win. They can't admit that they're wrong because deep down, it feels as scary as it did when they were little. So we'll call it the magic trick that they learn, gaslighting. What happens when that person is all grown up and they make a mistake? They can't admit it. Because remember, if they do, then you are going to leave them straight up. And they can not only be wrong, they didn't do it, but they actually have to make sure that you understand, this is going overboard here, but that it was actually your fault. Because now you will also see them as the hero, the savior, who now has brought awareness to them of what they are doing. So they even want you to thank them for pointing this out. That's the magic trick, gaslighting. They try to change how other people see things. So they might say the greatest hits it never happened, or you're remembering it wrong, or make sure that you feel pretty silly. They even think that there was a mistake. As a matter of fact, you're always doing this. And I can't believe that this is what you're doing again. And I don't even know why I'm hanging around here. So I don't know, what are you going to say for yourself? It's kind of like they're saying, and this is so wild, but they're saying, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes, your own self? And that causes confusion because it's really confusing for the people around them, because it's like somebody keeps moving the furniture around and saying, it's always been here. The chair's always been there. After a while, you start to think, am I going crazy? because I seem to not remember things right. And that is where the term gaslighting comes from, is that I think it was a play in the 1938. And then it was a movie eventually where the person just continually dimmed the gas lamps in the house. And if she says, it's getting darker, he's like, not to me. Seems the same to me. They're not trying to necessarily be mean. They are scared. So deep down, they feel like that little kid who might get in big trouble, but their way of dealing with it does hurt other people. I think important to recognize, but we'll get to this in part 2 now, I know for sure. I'm going to talk about the 4 different types of gaslighting, because it isn't something that typically happens just sometimes, because it's most likely the way that they learned how to be all the time. It's their home base. It's the way that they see and deal with the world. And that's where we start looking at the spectrum of narcissistic traits and tendencies, where there can be one where there is a version of, okay, I really don't know. I don't remember, but I don't think you're right. And that lacks that self-reflection of being able to say, okay, I don't know. I don't remember. So I'm going to lean into this and say, what do I not know that I don't know? But we'll cover all those in part 2. But changing this way of being, it's hard, because it means that person has to look at that scared kid behind the mask, which they might not even be aware of, and deal with those old hurts and fears. And that's tough to work on. And most people are not ready to do it. Even the people that finally come into therapy are sometimes just looking for validation. They just want to hear that no, their partner is the problem. So for people who care about somebody like this, it's important that you remember, it's not your fault. You are not crazy. It's okay to trust your own memories and feelings. As a matter of fact, please start from that place and understanding that this doesn't make it okay, but it can help make sense of a really confusing situation. And it is always okay to seek help and support yourself. And so I want to talk about 2 different perspectives. We'll do this and we'll wrap things up for today. Imagine 2 people that are watching a politician's speech. One, we'll say hypothetically, is a therapist who has studied emotional immaturity, narcissistic traits and tendencies for over 15 years. They've testified in a court case or 2. Maybe they've got a podcast. Maybe they've got a book coming out. The other is their client. They haven't heard much about these topics. They're watching a politician give the very same speech that this therapist is watching. They see it so differently. The therapist view. So the therapist notices, okay, this politician's stories keep changing and changing and changing. They don't take responsibility for the inaccuracies or for the mistakes, but they do blame everybody else. And they use tricks like gaslighting, making other people doubt themselves. And they really lash out and get rid of their own discomfort by calling people names so that people then have to defend themselves. And the more that somebody stays emotionally calm, this person just amps things up. So to the therapist, this looks like emotional immaturity or narcissism at its finest. It's seeing the familiar pattern that they've studied for years that they see every day in their office. It's so clear. It's what they know. The client, they see it so differently. They think that politician actually seems passionate. And when they're angry, they seem like, I can't understand why people aren't believing me, because they believe the politician is confused and upset about being treated unfairly. And they assume the politician is genuinely trying to help people, because why would they have gotten in politics if they didn't want to help people? So if something doesn't make sense, they think that they must just have misunderstood. So the client starts from a belief that people usually tell the truth. That is so adorable. So when something doesn't add up, they think it must be me who's confused. They don't even consider that the politician might not be being honest, or they might be trying to manipulate people, because it might be all that they know if they're operating from this deep emotional insecurity or the false self. And I think it's almost this, we say it's the if you know situation, because people who have dealt with narcissist or emotional immaturity in their own lives, and then they can come through this, they start to spot those behaviors more easily. But if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to see. And then when you break free from it, you find that you want to share. So when somebody finally realizes they've been dealing with an emotionally immature person or narcissist, and they've spent a lot of their time trying to make sense of that person's behavior, and they break free, then they want to tell everybody. It's like they've discovered the hidden truth and they want to warn everybody. Now, on the other side of the, if you know, there's the, you don't know. And this is the tricky part. So people who haven't experienced it, they don't believe it. They might think, okay, everybody's talking about narcissism. It's so fake. Or people are pointing out that, well, people, if they're calling somebody out as a narcissist, that means they're jealous. Or those calling out emotional immaturity or narcissism, they must be immature themselves. The bigger picture here, which this is so interesting to see from the therapist chair, is that difference in understanding, it starts to create a really big divide in family systems, which I see complete families that are divided over one or 2 narcissistic individuals or extremely emotionally mature individuals. Because some people see manipulative behavior clearly. They see the lack of consistency or the patterns of inconsistency or the lying. But others, they don't recognize it. And that can lead to arguments and misunderstandings about what's really happening in politics or in family systems. And so the importance of awareness, when I'm given this version of the story, it shows why it's important to learn about emotional health and manipulation tactics, and to be willing to acknowledge and sit with our own discomfort, because we might have already had this preconceived notion about somebody or something. And so then we just dive down this rabbit hole of confirmation bias and just look for all the reasons why I can't be wrong. And some of that is our own emotional immaturity, because understanding these issues can help you make better judgments about what you see and what you hear, especially from people in your family or public figures. And let me throw one more concept in here. I call it the code breakers. Let's consider another group of people watching the same politician, we'll say the same speech. So this group doesn't just misunderstand emotional immaturity or narcissistic tendencies. They actually believe that the politician is being deceptively, deliberately cryptic. And so they think changing stories are intentional, we'll call them codes. So then they start to see it as their job to crack these codes. And then that can lead to some pretty complex theories about hidden meaning. There's some psychological phenomenon that I think are fascinating that you see in this scenario. One's called apophenia. It's seeing patterns and randomness. That's when people see meaningful patterns or connections in random or unrelated things. Seeing a picture of someone in a piece of burnt toast, or just seeing this must mean this must mean this. An example, and I had this one in my office not long ago. The politician says coffee one time in one speech, and then they say dark in another. So this code breaker thought this was a secret message about a dark plot, when really I think the politician liked coffee in the one speech, and they were describing a dark rain cloud in another one. So two unrelated contexts. And where does that come from? I think it's the brain's desire for certainty, because our brains crave certainty and will work hard to find it, even when it's not there. People start to create these elaborate explanations for these inconsistent messages or these codes. And what's wild is that we can start to have a tendency to prefer these complex theories over admitting, I don't know, or this feels uncomfortable. If you've ever heard of Occam's razor, it's basically the simplest explanation is often right. It's this principle that says sometimes it's easier to just go with the simple explanation. The example from politics, a politician's contradictory statements about healthcare might be a coded message about secret government programs. The simple explanation, or Occam's razor, is the politician doesn't really understand the healthcare policy. Maybe they don't know economics well, and they're making inconsistent statements. And I know as I've developed my own healthy ego, which I want to remind you is, I know what I know because it's based off of real life experience. Because it's based off of real life experience, then the opposite of that healthy ego is pathological defensive narcissism, where one is operating from this false self. So they think that they have to have an opinion or a strong opinion or know something about everything. Rather than say, I don't know, they're going to throw out a theory, or they're going to weave things together until they finally feel like, okay, this makes sense. And then is everybody else buying it? But that Occam's razor just suggests a simple explanation is more likely correct. Sometimes people prefer the complex theory. Why? I think this falls into the concept of mental gymnastics. And it's that complex, twisted thinking that people use to maintain a belief, even if there's some evidence against it. Say a politician is caught in a lie. So instead of accepting this, their supporters claim, well, the media must have doctored the video. And heaven forbid, now we've got AI that can do that. And then they say, well, or the politician was joking. Or finally, they argue that, well, all politicians lie, so it's okay. It's what they do. So they start to shift these explanations. This is the mental gymnastics to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth. And I think part of this speaks to our whole need for purpose in community, that people with deep insecurities or they lack purpose might be drawn to these, I know we'll call them code-breaking communities, because it gives them a sense of importance. Okay, I know the truth. Provides a community of like-minded people, and it fulfills this need that we have to feel special or in the know. Because when we don't feel that way, then we start to feel uncomfortable, and we don't like that uncomfortable feeling. So we need to find this sense of purpose. And rather than a deep introspection, then we can say, no, I'm going to be the special one that can figure out, break this code. So then when these people get together, they share, they build on each other's theories, ideas start to become more complex, and they can grow bigger and more grandiose. And then that whole group reinforces the beliefs, and it makes it harder and harder to challenge. So I think that this whole concept shows how complex these situations about emotional immaturity and narcissistic traits and tendencies can become. Because now we have experts who recognize narcissistic behavior. We have people who don't recognize it, take things at face value. We have some people that think that they know, and they don't know what they don't know, and they're creating content as well. And then we have those who see deliberate code and hidden meanings. So the whole mix of perspectives can make conversations about everything. Politics, public figures, people doing things in your family, really challenging. So I think it really highlights the need for critical thinking, or for the self-reflection, or learning that we grow through our discomfort. As a therapist, I think understanding these psychological principles, being aware of our own biases and needs when we're interpreting information, is the foundation that we need to really operate from this place of recognizing what that is when we're being gaslit and what that brings up for us and then what we do with it. So with that said, we'll get to part 2 because the client here in about 5 minutes. If you have questions, comments, anything, please send them in to contact@tonyoverbay.com or info@tonyoverbay.com. I would love to know if you have examples of some of the things that I shared today. And if you can get them in the next week, then we'll include some of those in part 2. And we'll go into more details about gaslighting and then 4 different types of gaslighting. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I appreciate it. Have an amazing week, and I will see you next time on Waking Up to Narcissism.